Welcome to another edition of Two Irish Guys Discussing Software. This month, I'm without Brendan. He's not here. He's sadly on holidays. But the really good news, I am joined by my very good friend, co-founder, the real genius behind the company and all the ideas, and Waterford native and our CTO and Head of Service Innovation, Rowan O'Donoghue. How are you?
Drumroll. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much. We had some feedback, I believe, that we needed someone with a bit more charisma and style to come in, so we'll give Brendan a bit of a break this week.
Shit, I'm in trouble there. We might have to replace me too then.
Well, we'll assess that at the end, so we'll see what happens. You know?
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll have a little poll of our listeners to see how genuinely true that is. Or is that just the office poll?
Yeah, it's self-inflated, but anyway.
Great to have you here. Great to have you here. We have another episode. We have a cracking episode this week, actually. We're going to discuss and explore enterprise application security and how to avoid the king's ransomware, as they say. And we're going to be joined by one of our latest members of our own team, Ben Lipczynski, who is our head of security services.
Yep.
A very exciting man. We're looking forward to have a chat with him very soon. He'll be joining us, and we're going to talk about, I think this stuff is in the press. You talk about the Colonial Pipeline.
Yeah.
Our own health service here in Ireland's been attacked.
It's on the up.
It's on the up.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a whole industry. It's commercially rewarding for a lot of these guys. So I think we're just going to see more and more of it. So naturally, it's on people's radars. So it's great that we're discussing it today, and we've got Ben on board. So,
well, the scary thing is we got illegitimate actors. Like the likes of those two we just described. We've also got potentially legitimate actors. I don't know if you've been listening to about the Pegasus report, the Pegasus software with the Israeli software company.
Yeah, the spyware.
The spyware.
Yeah.
So you've got a whole range of things. So this whole area is exploding. So some really good stuff, some really good content to talk about, some surveys to talk about. But we'll get to that shortly. Yeah. Let's have a look what's in the news. So I was just checking what's in the news. Now, sadly, we obviously don't have Brendan, so we're not going to get a monologue of results. Thank God, says he.
Fingers crossed.
But we have, I saw, speaking of results, Oracle have leapfrogged Salesforce, and we've given Oracle an
So this is a good news story now, right?
Well, this is a good news story.
Just checking.
We give Larry an awful hard time on this thing.
Poor Larry.
And deservedly so. But actually, they have moved their market cap ahead of Salesforce. Now, for years, obviously, it was ahead of Salesforce. But up until recently, talk about 10 months ago, Salesforce had a market cap of $256 billion. And was 40% higher than Oracle's $173 billion. 7 weeks ago, it was $243 billion for Oracle and $225 billion. And I had a look this morning. It's $250 billion Oracle. $225 billion.
Wow.
And Larry loves his competition.
Salesforce is just static.
Well, that's it. I mean, what's the story? What has happened to Larry and to Safra? Have they finally turned the corner?
Yeah, seems to be paying off.
Yeah. And speaking of billions, did you see Steve Ballmer?
Steve Ballmer. You know, I met Steve once.
I thought he was dead.
I think he's just retired.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's dead.
Where did you meet him? Sorry, I didn't know I was insulting company here.
Did you not? Oh, okay. Well, this is when you kind of mingle with the elite, But no, we were. Where did I meet Steve? It was back in 2008, I think it was. This is when we had our old IBM BP business. We had some vendors used to knock on our door and ask if we were interested in exploring a relationship with them.
Don't tell me Steve came knocking.
One of Steve's millions, part of the local team, invited us over to, I think it was in Houston, and to go to their annual partner event.
What?
Obviously a very high wattage, vivacious guy, not like his predecessor, but he roasted me.
He roasted you?
Yeah, because when you were over there, obviously you go to the event and you mingle with the partners and you understand about the wares and services, etc. And this time, obviously, Microsoft were trying to convert us, to get access to the IBM footprint. But then at the end of the conference, you have an audience with Steve. Right. So there were about 10 other potential partners. So I asked the question, a bit tongue-in-cheek. So, because
what was your question?
Well, my question was, so there was lots of, I guess, unhappiness amongst the IBM or the Microsoft BPs about the reduction in percentage they were getting on reseller services. Down about 2%, 1%, right? So I put up the question, say, great, being over here this week, understand about the journey, sounds really positive. And I was just explaining about our story, in the IBM domain, very niche, typically margins up around 8%, very hard to see in terms of what the opportunity was. And he literally calls it out and he goes, this guy is exactly why the rest of you guys need to be a Microsoft partner. You're roasting customers. Oh, he's doing it in tongue in cheek as well. But I was just kind of going, I was that small in my chair. I said, right, okay.
Because he had a bit of a crazy personality.
He is off the charts. But really good guy. But yeah, it was nearly like a Conor McGregor moment, you know what I mean? But anyway.
Yeah, he's worth over 100 billion now. And you know what as well? I was speaking about Larry earlier. He will be disappointed. He might be his overall market cap. But as of the last figures I looked at, he wasn't quite at the 100 billion.
He didn't get it, did he?
He's 98.6 billion according to Bloomberg billionaires on their last report. These things can change. Go on, Larry, have a go.
There's hope for you.
There's hope for you. Listen, we need to get to serious business because a number of serious things have been going on in the software world, but not only in the software world, in the whole tech world. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast many times, as you know.
Yep.
And we've talked about the changes, the antitrust law changes that are happening. We talked about that in the last episode. But only last week, we had some sweeping changes from Joe Biden in their promotion of competition. And indeed, as of this week, we've got new things like the FTC, run by Lina Khan, have just announced that they have unanimously voted to ramp up law enforcement against repair restrictions. By enforcing against restrictions that violate antitrust or consumer protection laws, the Commission is taking important steps to restore the right to repair. This is good stuff.
This is a move in the right direction.
This is good stuff. And Biden signed a whole lot of sweeping executive orders, and he made a great quote. I quote, he goes, "Capitalism without competition is exploitation."
Right.
Yes.
And they have a new council, I believe. I thought it was an employee engagement committee, but it was at a customer competition, or no, White House Competition Council.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Right, so they have that, and they are going to work more and more with the European Union, which has been leading over the last 5 or 6 years, arguably, but the US have really stepped in. And I saw Amy Klobuchar, who was, I think she was was she not running for the Democratic nomination? She was one of the many that were in the race with Biden.
Yeah.
She was on CNN earlier this week, and she was talking about taking on monopoly. So this is a huge big story.
Yeah.
Big story.
There was one potential flaw I saw in it, because I was reading it during the week, and there's some details in there about big data. And I think there was a piece there about, avoiding these kind of generic brands, obviously trying to promote customer choice. But they were saying that big vendors are not going to be able to use big data to promote those wares. So an example would be someone like Amazon. You know, the way they do these kind of basics brands and stuff for that. So Amazon, they let other third parties go in and sell the wares, like maybe Duracell batteries, etc. But that would potentially prevent someone like Amazon in terms of selling their own basics batteries and stuff like that. And that potentially could extend to things like whether Apple down the line, they include like a note, as part of their the iOS application or the operating system, but they may be prevented from, I guess, like the likes of Evernote, in terms of unfairly protecting those organizations from a competition perspective. So so it might be,
Yeah, well, I think they're trying. Aren't they trying to separate the marketplace though from the actual products themselves? Because at the moment, Amazon own both in that example. And actually, they have come out, as you'll probably seen, they have themselves and Facebook have come out and asked for seek a recusal of Lina Khan to actually step back from her role as head of the FTC. So I actually think it's quite interesting. I mean, Facebook actually filed a petition arguing that Khan had consistently made public statements accusing the company of bad conduct that constitutes a violation of antitrust law. So they're really going after her because some of the stuff that she did, as far back as when she was a student. Yeah. Talk about, going back into people's pasts and digging up the smallest thing. Be careful what you do as a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old.
I have that conversation every day with my kids.
I'm just saying, as a 50,
I hope she didn't do it on Facebook now in terms of
But all I'm saying is, as a 50-year-old man, I'm glad that social media technology did not exist in my day.
Different
the
world.
things they would have found out.
But that's a step in the right direction.
Oh, it's a fantastic step.
I know.
No, really, really good. And I think this what we're seeing now is for the first time really seeing some big changes.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's really, really important. The other thing I thought was really interesting, and it's kind of related to our business as well, is further news. Now, myself and Brendan have spoken about this previously, you would have heard the Microsoft claim by the UK license reseller value licensing lawsuit against Microsoft. They're claiming £270 million in the UK, the London High Court, okay? And what they're doing is they're accusing Microsoft of abusing its dominant position in the kind of desktop space by saying licenses that are perpetual. So these licenses are perpetually issued. They're forcing customers who consume software as a service, so the Office 365 suite or whatever it is, and they're heavily discounting that on the basis that you basically extinguish or hand back your right to the old licenses.
The on-premise ones.
Yeah. So
right,
we saw IBM trying to do this as well in the past.
So they're trying to push people to the cloud.
They're pushing people to the cloud.
Okay.
So Value License are claiming that this specifically contravenes UK Competition Act of 1998 and indeed articles of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So ultimately saying it's fundamentally impacting like the fundamentals of the European Union, which a lot of the laws are based on. So I think it's quite incredible. But IBM, I mean, they tried to do the same thing with, was it Domino software over the years, and they don't own it anymore, obviously.
But it's a bit removing choice, for a lot of customers still have on-premise licenses. I'm sure there's probably worth a good few bob. They want to move them onto organizations that maybe are looking for the licenses. But it's this whole shift across the board, trying to get customers into the cloud services, and it just ain't paying off.
You were looking at IBM. Tell us what's happening with IBM. We have to talk about our best friends.
Speaking about our best friends, we love IBM, but they're back on the road again. So they're on an acquisition trail.
Oh, I heard this. Always. Who did they buy?
They buy Boxcoat.
Okay.
So they're ramping up in terms of their spend. This is their 10th acquisition.
Okay.
In about the last 18 months. So they're really getting behind their focus in terms of driving to hybrid cloud. So this is, there's a couple of services companies in here. A lot of companies struggling in terms of modernizing their applications, getting them into the cloud. There's a couple of acquisitions in here around from a security perspective in the cloud. But I guess, listen, it's kind of interesting to see, I think there'll be more on the way. But unfortunately, I was talking to Gartner last week, and we were talking about IBM, our best friends. But unfortunately, they're rated a paltry 24 out of 100 in their cloud services portfolio compared to the other vendors. So we talked about Oracle, for example. They've been up there around 70%. Amazon are up at 90%. So the maturity of the service offering, they're rated at the bottom of the pile.
Wow.
So it's a bit like, going into the casino.
Yeah.
And batting everything on red. This strategy better pay off.
But they're not even, their cloud revenue growth is pretty low, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it was 6%. I think I saw was they had
6% overall, but I think what's pushing that is the Red Hat numbers.
Yeah.
So Red Hat has actually increased, but the overall. I mean, if you look back at IBM's numbers and we talk about their Q2 results, their numbers have been in constant decline from a market share perspective in the last year. It went from 34, I think, down to about 23, 19, and in Q4 last year was just 8% in terms of growth, right?
Yeah.
And I think in Q2 now it's down to 6%.
Okay.
So the strategy certainly ain't paying off. But behind that, I guess the Red Hat cloud software sales and stuff like that is kind of bumping it up. So, and interestingly enough, I think S&P actually downgraded them to an A- rating actually earlier on this year, particularly in relation to their strategy and could they pull it off.
Was that
and the debt they were carrying.
Was that not to do with their debt? Yes.
It was, to do with the debt, but they're all linked. But obviously, future outlook and whether they have the ability to kind of pay it off. But I mean, if you look at even on the debt side of things, I mean,
because they have huge debt, don't they?
Like, it is eye-watering. I mean, what's the figure there at the moment? I think we've got like 56.4 billion, billion. Yeah, and this is growing. I mean, if you put this in perspective, it was 34 billion in 2008.
Right.
45 billion in 2017. So so I think this comes on the back of, there's a bit of jitters out there in terms of whether IBM actually have the right strategy.
Yeah.
This all in on cloud. Is it actually working for them? Obviously it's great to see they've got a bit of success on these kind of numbers. They're up 3%. It's modest, but is this long term?
Sorry, their numbers are out recently, up 3%.
Numbers are up 3%. Yeah, so it's an end to that consecutive. Is it 22 quarters of negative growth?
It was kind of level last.
It was a couple of blips.
It was going on forever. It was going on forever.
There's a positive. It's on the upwards.
But that will change again once they move Kindle on. I mean, they have Kindle numbers still in their IBM numbers, haven't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously they're trying to get rid of Kindle. I mean, that's the old kind of GTS business.
Yeah.
Moving that out as part of the managed services, that's going to take a bit of time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've got all these new acquisitions, which is no doubt behind that debt.
Yeah.
But listen, it's on a positive track, but it really depends on whether this cloud and this AI strategy is actually going to pay off. You know, and again, it's kind of, from our side, it's difficult to see because we see there's a lot of chatter about cloud and cloud pack and services. We haven't actually seen a whole lot of adoption. So I think people are...
But they're claiming
their water.
Their results said that cloud pack was...
I've seen that. Yeah, I don't believe that at all. I think there's a lot of chatter, right? Yeah. But I think coming back to that rating of 24 out of 100, and I think customers are beginning to question, do IBM actually have the right strategy to be able to pull this off? Yeah. You know, unless those numbers start going back up, I'd actually be worried. But
well, if you compare actually that you're talking about 6% growth in cloud revenue for IBM, if you compare those to SAP, for example, they've come out with the results and they're 11% growth. You know, almost double percentage growth that IBM are experiencing, and that's without an acquisition like Red Hat, for example, which is a significant acquisition, as you know. And that's probably, I mean, it's Red Hat who's probably was responsible for a significant portion of that $50 billion debt. You know?
And I think the biggest thing is, I mean, if I look at those acquisitions, particularly the services companies, I think where if they are going to pull this off, it's about helping customers do that adoption for the applications which they feel is right to modernize. You know,
well, all the CEOs think their strategy is working, including Christian Klein, who was also saying that his strategy is working. So I'm sure
everybody's strategy
everybody's saying their strategy is working until it doesn't work.
So there was another bit of news along with another piece for IBM. They had a bit of a fiasco.
What did they do?
A bit of an outage. So obviously
IBM had an outage.
Yeah, this probably isn't really a good one to be kind of shining a light on, particularly when, you know, we talk about those cloud-based figures and IBM trying to get into the cloud. But anyway, it was a bit of an email fiasco. So you know the way HCL kind of bought Notes and stuff for Al, and they took over back in 2018. IBM, because HCL were dropping.
So not all our listeners might know that.
Oh, so right, okay. So we better a bit of a history lesson then. Yeah. So obviously HCL now own Notes, right? They bought that back to
the Indian technology company.
Indian company, and I think if you'll see some of the details behind that, But IBM's so ingrained and used Notes for years, right, for business processes and the Notes application. So it wasn't just about email, but it was business applications. So obviously IBM, when HCL decided to drop their cloud and hosting services, they said, right, we're going to bring this back in again. So there was a bit of an email migration going on. And obviously it just went belly up, right? And I think Arvind tried to downplay it. It was a bit of an ad hoc disruption, only affecting users on an ad hoc basis. But it turns out that it was actually more widespread than what people believe. So it was about half of their 400,000 mailboxes were gone for a huge amount of time.
Sorry, just so I'm clear, did they rebuild a new email?
No, they're moving it back into IBM. So they're moving it out of the host.
Are they still using Notes though?
Still using Notes.
Okay,
yeah.
Still using
Notes.
Notes.
With Outlook, and there's, I think they've with their web one is called Verve internally and so on, but it's still Notes behind the scenes. Yeah. So the whole thing just kind of went belly up. Now, if we peel back the layers of the onion, what really happened here, it looks like they didn't have the proper skills to plan the migration, right? Now, I'm sure there's probably lots of IBM or Notes experts who were furloughed over the years who are sitting on the sidelines laughing at this, right?
So we know loads of them.
Yeah, we know loads of them. So I did actually put up a comment on LinkedIn calling this out, because we've got lots of this expertise within the team. And we know for years, we had this when we were BP.
Were you offering our expertise to IBM?
I was offering to help. I'd hate to see someone down. You know,
very generous.
They still love the technology.
Were you going to give them a special discount?
I give them a discount, a loyalty bonus.
You're very generous.
For all the business they've given us over the years.
Yeah, you're very generous. I'm so pleased we're friends.
But anyway, so that wasn't a good. But I think there's talk of it again, linking back to the numbers and the debt because of the disruption having an impact on the numbers. So they've actually resorted to using Slack rather than email because they can't send out emails to process orders.
Okay.
So there you go. Let's hope they've got more a robust platform behind their Slack environment.
Oh dear.
But anyway,
yeah. Well, you know, they do some good things from time to time, and they actually came out with a very interesting survey. Believe it or not, they published a survey.
I like a good survey.
Yeah. But they did this. They worked with a company called Morning Consult, looking at decision makers' federal government decision makers in the United States. Okay, big part of the industry clearly, and they were asking them questions. They asked 500 current and former U.S. government IT decision makers about their prioritization of cybersecurity. So we're talking about today. Security. We're going to get back to the topic at hand before we bring Ben in.
Yeah.
And we're talking about security and the ransomware and Pegasus and all these issues. So clearly, this is a huge issue. So a lot of surveys going on. I'm sure we're seeing them coming into our own organisation. 500 organisations asking them about that transition to the cloud. Okay, this modernization of technology is where clearly we're at the edge of that all the time with what we do in our business, as you know. But 75% of respondents said that moving data to the cloud is a challenge, all right? And 70% of those said that security risks was a top barrier to cloud migration, okay? So what we're looking at here is clearly people having challenges, from these, particularly you talk about federal government, large systems, large applications used by citizens, used by government agencies, used by mission critical systems. I think there's a term they use in the UK, and maybe Ben will fill us in, the critical network infrastructure, CNI I think it's called. These are all part of the critical network. And increasingly, there's a trend everything to go to the cloud, but the reality is not everything is moving to the cloud. And I actually think this has been a really, really good time to bring Ben in. Ben has just joined us. Ben, how are you?
Thank you.
Good to see you, Ben. So Ben, I know your background, you recently joined us. We're delighted to have you heading up our security practice. You're ex-Royal Navy.
Right.
You're ex-UK Ministry of Defence, and about 5 years ago you joined the private sector, and you're in here now in the last couple of months. You spent most of your existence in the security world, in the security apparatus of one of probably the most reputable organisations in the world in that area. What do you think of this? I mean, honestly, this sort of feedback to that. If we take that survey and look at it and say, what does that mean for our business? Because does that mean they're going to stick around on some of the older stuff for longer? Is that going to increase the importance of security for some of these legacy applications? And how should customers think about that? So is that a good place to start?
Yeah, we can start there. Yeah, I think it comes back to, I think if we look back at the history, it's that sort of critical national infrastructure piece.
I did get it right, did I?
Close, yeah. So depending on whether you're in the US or the UK, you have a number of domains, which can include things like financial services, transportation, and then the subsequent subdomains. And if we think back to the history, sort of cyber started to rise in prevalence, in the early 2000s. And it was back in 2010, I think the term the fifth domain was coined, and then subsequently accepted by NATO in sort of 2016. And I think it sort of came around the fact that the technology that was being used to exploit and disrupt national infrastructure was moving more and more into this digital domain, where threat actors could remotely conduct their attacks. They didn't have to come into your geography to achieve it, and ultimately hide in the digital shadows. And it was at that point the governments turned around and went, well, we need to do something about this. And then they realised that actually a lot of it had been privatised. Yeah. So you have to approach this problem in a different way. You have to go through a sort of education, training, support.
Is it a bit like the spies are now privatised, like the spooks? The guys working in the MI5s and the James Bonds.
You've been watching far too much TV.
But it is a bit like that.
I guess cyber, the digital domain has made things a lot easier. It's a tool. No longer do you have to rent the hotel room next door and put the cup against the wall to listen to what's going on.
Yeah.
They've probably got an Alexa there, or their mobile phone, which you can link into. Well,
you heard about Pegasus. I couldn't get over. I was listening to reading the Guardian reports during the week, and I couldn't get over what the fear. One guy was telling that when he was having a conversation about, he was taking his two phones that he had, putting them into the spare bedroom and putting them under two mattresses, so that the phones couldn't be turned on to listen to the conversation. I mean, it's scary, isn't it? So it is actually really, really easy if they wanted to do it.
The technology's here, I think, linking back to your conversation earlier, and a lot of the technology isn't developed in a malicious manner. A lot of it's developed by engineers to be able to achieve their job.
Yeah.
You then get somebody else with a different intent, a different motive that says, oh, thank you very much, I can use that to achieve that, Wi-Fi sniffing, for example.
Yeah.
And I think this move to the cloud, I think that there's some benefits to it, which I think are fairly clear. But there's also understanding it, the trust of the system. What are they exposing themselves to?
Yeah.
And this doesn't even negate it's not a clean swap. There's a lot of complexity for an engineering level. And I think we've just seen people start to stand back and have a look at this and think, do I really understand what I'm doing? Ultimately, you could potentially increasing your exposure to vulnerabilities or external actions.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we're seeing now. The cloud thing sort of come over the hype curve, and now people are taking that opportunity to sit back and go, actually, have I truly considered the operational, but in this case, the security risk of making such a move?
Yeah.
And do you think there's that hesitance because some of the cloud services are not mature yet, and then we're seeing more in terms of a prevalence, in terms of these kind of exposures, ransomware, etc. Do you think people are kind of, this is what creating the focus, the 75% people worried about security, they're just kind of going, ugh.
I think partially, I think, the capability's there, but I think it's the understanding of it. I know that some of the cloud providers have recently started to get a bit nervous around this in the sense of, we can't forget, the cloud's somebody else's computer. They can secure the tin, but the user has to be very conscious of their roles and responsibilities when they move their systems there. And they actually retain an awful lot of those roles and responsibilities around security, correct configuration, data transfer, for example. And I think the effort required behind that, plus the enhanced training and development in this new technology, is suddenly coming to, bubbling to the surface as a consideration.
Do you think they don't know that? Do you think, do they underestimate that?
I certainly do. Yeah, I think it's underestimated. I don't, none of this is impossible, but I don't think the true extent of effort to ensure that the successful transition is fully understood, or even the partial transition.
And whose responsibility is it that to tell companies that there's a requirement for the state to get involved, like legislators to explain that this transition requires certain boxes to be ticked to keep everybody safe? Or is it the provider's responsibility? I mean, I'm not that I'm promoting the state intervention, but sometimes if it is critical network infrastructure, well then, in this particular case, we're talking about it in terms of that survey, but even things that are not necessarily owned by the government, the airline systems, they're not owned by the government. If every airline stopped flying, look what happened when we had lockdown last year. People couldn't go anywhere. Businesses were really impacted. Who's responsible for that, do you think? Or is it a combination?
Well, I think there's the responsibility ultimately lies with the service provider. I think,
Okay.
So the airline. That's where I would place it. Yes, governments are getting nervous about this. I mean, recently in Ireland, we've seen direction that allows our government bodies to move to the cloud, but with due consideration. And I think the government's role, as we've seen in the US, the UK, and Ireland, is to equip those considering such a move with the right questions to ask.
Okay.
And providing sort of support in going through these checks and balances to make sure that everything has been fully considered. For me, it's about understanding the risk. It's not just identifying it, but truly understanding it. And that's dynamic. That's dependent on your threat environment. That's dependent on your operational requirements today. It's dependent on where you want to take your operational requirements in the future, new products, new services, for example. But the next key question is, what is acceptable risk? It is a bit of a cold war out there. You've come up with a new defensive measure. The threat actors, if sufficiently motivated, will come up with a new attack. And nothing is therefore zero. So you need to determine what your acceptable risk level is and take the appropriate mitigating actions to achieve it. And that's not necessarily just one mitigating action. It could be a combination of several, defense in depth across people, processes and technologies. And then I think you go into sort of the maturity curve there. Once you've achieved your acceptable level, you start again. You review it again, you reassess and you move on.
And do you think organizations have a good grasp on what the security risk is? Because we see this, when we look about what they call the legacy applications, in-house, we've seen customers where they've suffered with a loss of knowledge. The expertise that was once in the organization is now gone. Sometimes they're nearly fearful of doing anything with those systems. Then there's a potential of a move to the cloud. Do you think they have a good handle on it? I mean, are these old applications, are they less or more prone to these kind of threats, you know?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think it really depends on the individual company. I think scale clearly has a change, a component to this. You know, companies that maybe have gone through a rapid case of merger and acquisition where they've done combination of technologies. They might have merged a company in with their as an operation, but also as a technology and the people, and then subsequently possibly lost the people behind it.
Yeah.
I have heard stories of the grey box with the green light on. We don't touch it. We don't know what's inside because we don't know our operational impact. And I think that, you know, that hits on sort of a core point. And security should be an enabler, not stopping you from achieving your objectives. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, most people are measured on operational output, operational objectives, not how well they were secured. You know, rarely do you get marked up or a bonus because you weren't attacked that week. And I think for me, you know, mentioning my background, Sun Tzu for me sums it up.
Yeah.
In the art of war, you know, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So for me, it's constantly reassessing the threat environment. It's constantly reassessing what you're doing and making those appropriate adjustments. Do legacy components form part of that? Most definitely. I think with legacy components, one thing we have to remember is they've been around for a while, legacy, and it's provided opportunity for threat actors to have a poke around and identify vulnerabilities. Equally, it has provided the good guys to poke around and identify the vulnerabilities. So it's constantly keeping an eye on that and taking, as we mentioned before, those appropriate mitigating steps to reach your acceptable risk level. That should be considered in the context of your environment. So across all your depths as your architecture, across all your domains of your business, and typically coined people, processes, technology.
So it's probably no surprise then that survey that people are. It seems that they're comfortable where they are on some of these older applications, these older systems, from a security perspective because of familiarity, because they know where you talked about the Sun Tzu things. They know where their own weaknesses and their strengths are. So when you know your weaknesses are, at least you can provide some level of defense. Whereas if you don't know them, in the new environment, that's where some of the challenges are. Perhaps they won't know where those challenges.
I think there's definitely some of that. I mean, you know, change is risk.
Yeah.
So making the change to a new platform, a new technology, has its own inherent risks in its own right. So that should be considered within the equation as, you know, which is the greater risk, the move to the new platform, introducing potentially new vulnerabilities, but also having operational downtime, operational impacts, or staying where you are, but having those vulnerabilities known out there and having to take proactive actions, such as hardening your systems to appropriately put yourself in a stronger security posture.
So you probably have to, because everybody wants to ultimately get to the new environment somewhere along that journey. So I think it's probably the wise move is to look at that, particularly for something that's very critical, for sure, that if you cannot afford a problem, is that transition takes a bit of time. Because you look at the sort of products that we support in our business, you know, DB2, WebSphere, the data management products suite, Cognos, all these products that we support. Typically, they're not, you know, corner shop systems. They're mission critical systems. So that transition needs to be done very, very carefully. But protecting the old one, actually knowing the vulnerabilities, is critical, isn't it?
Yes, you can't forget where you are. It's you don't switch one off and switch the other one. It's a journey to be made and measured.
And you have to have those people.
You have to have the people, but even if you look at the IBM example, risk comes in different forms. Like there was an outage where they just didn't have the skills. Probably went too far on security and didn't think about the operation risk. And I think would it not be fair to say that, you know, the way I've always thought about security is it's inevitable with technology and what we have today. You're going to get caught out at some point, right? But the real acid test is how your ability to recover on the back of it. And we've seen it recently with the HSE example. They've been massively impacted. But if you're able to recover them systems to a point without having to pay a ransom, for example, and so on, surely isn't that your best defense against a lot of these? I mean, you can always, you know, go on the kind of defense or the offensive to try and harden these systems, etc. But it's like a game of cat and mouse. There's always a back door. You get exposed. I think for me that was always, but I don't know whether that's the right approach. I mean,
I think
people overlook that?
Yeah, well, I think they do. I think, it's, you call it the bang, I guess, where the attack. You've got to look before the bang and post the bang, and you should be sort of ready for all. Do everything you can to defend your assets and ultimately your business proactively. You understand the system around you, understand what your critical functions are. Your crown jewels. Appropriately prioritize your efforts to secure these within your constraints of business operations and finance and available resourcing skill sets. But yes, unfortunately, sometimes all your best efforts, you might fall foul of a threat actor. So be ready to respond to it, and it's not about giving it lip service and just having an instant response capability. Practice it. Post-incident, or when you're being hacked, is not the time to learn how it works. Yeah. And I think another thing that I would highlight here is it's not just the tech teams, it's not just the security teams. This is the whole company. Yeah. It's about the messaging to your stakeholders. It's about the messaging to your customers, and making sure that everyone has this joined up thinking in approach, but also that operational resiliency, that ability to fall back to other options should your primary technologies become unavailable. And I think there's numerous examples where the old school way of conducting business is forgotten over time and not practiced. Yeah. And very subtly, potentially without being captured within your risk metrics, the dependency on these critical technologies slowly grows. And then when you realise it, it's too late.
And if you look at the technologies a lot of our customers have, so MQ and DB2, some of the ones we mentioned, is you're with us a short amount of time, but do you see any trends and commonality in terms of where the weak points are which people need to focus on? Or
yeah, I like you said, I've only been here a short while, but there are a couple of themes that I think are standing out. And for me, the core product, if you will, is mature. It's been around for a while. The sort of niggles and its vulnerabilities are well known and addressable. It's the other components that get sold with this as a package to make it function within a customer's environment, to allow it to integrate within their ecosystem. And a lot of these are using open source technologies and script. And I think the trend I'm starting to see bubble to the surface is it's these bits that are potentially the vulnerability. And I think that's twofold. One, because it's not within the core control of the software manufacturer. But secondly, because they're open source, everyone can lay their hands on it and pull it apart and poke around with it. Fortunately, we have good guys and people that do this, white hats, and they'll kindly let the software developers know, seen this vulnerability, there's, they can earn from it on bounty programs, they can take pride from it in finding a vulnerability and build up their profile. Flip side, there's other people finding these vulnerabilities. They might not actually use them as the threat actor. They might find this vulnerability and sell the knowledge on. Someone else might take that knowledge and develop a malicious piece of software. Yeah. Someone else might take that malicious piece of software and then use it to achieve an objective. So there's a whole sort of ecosystem and business operating here.
And when you look at an IBM product, because when you talk about those open source components, most IBM products are a combination of IBM products, but also the open source components and stuff like that. So it'd be fair to say if you see something like Java or an Apache HTTP component, it just doesn't affect one application like DB2. The same components are also in other products like MQ and WAS, etc. So, I mean, if we look at a lot of the security bulletins, it probably is fair to say that most of those concerns are directly, as you say, related to those.
Correct. And I think this comes to knowing yourself. There might be an efficient means of achieving your risk mitigation by standing back and looking at the bigger picture. If there's multiple products all using the same vulnerable open source software, then actually tackling that rather than looking at individual systems might be a more economic way of achieving your appropriate risk level. Just remembering that you've got to reassess this on a periodic basis. Things move on, and test it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because if you think of it, we always get asked the question about security, naturally so, in terms of can you write fixes and patches. But would it not be fair to say, when we talk about the open source components, IBM are in the same boat. They don't own the open source, so they're dependent on that community in which to write the fix for those components to go back and bundle as part of patch for the product.
Yeah, and certainly, and I think the same with, you could argue the same for their own core products as well. If they're moving them on and they're no longer in support, then that expertise, will have been moved on either with new products, or they've gone to look for roles, elsewhere. So the ability to look at how these components integrate, and for the customer, even knowing what is in the box. You have the main brand, say Cognos, on the wrapping, but actually knowing what's in there is key, because they might not have all undergone the same due diligence.
You're describing a world of spies and counter spies.
Spooks.
And yeah, it is. It's like this, as I said earlier, James Bond, John le Carrier. I'm seeing it all now. This sounds like a very sexy role you've got now.
There's a movie here, is there?
Is this the? They should really sex this up a bit. No, it's great. I love it.
To be fair, there are some good guys. We've got some white hat guys and so on, which is help us to in the team as well to defend against these. But certainly I don't know whether it's a sexy industry in a role, but we'll see what happens over time.
And Ben, tell me, you recently, by the way, can I say this? You recently were successful with a US patent. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think this is probably my malicious mind bubbling to the surface. So I would have had experience in I think what you could coin as exploiting the EM spectrum. So as with a lot of other things, these tools are developed to achieve one thing. So in the case of 5G, communication. However, it's sort of fairly coincidental maybe that the frequency spectrum used, there's two bands, but the upper frequency spectrum used within 5G also happens to fall within the same level as your airport scanner. So myself and a colleague at the time sat back and thought, well, could we turn a 5G array that's out there using for your mobile phones into a giant airport scanner? And so we filed the patent to do that. But for the good guys and the good teams out there, the idea is that you could combine this with other technologies such as CCTV, visual recognition systems, and support security authorities in very rapidly identifying people carrying potential threatening weapons, metal objects, and combine the two together so that you could be more precise in your incident response, albeit in the physical domain, and direct them onto the potential target far more rapidly.
Well, I can tell you that certainly sounds like a very exciting development.
I'd love to see his garage. Airport scanners.
The good news, Ben, I'm sure, and I know this, you're one of the good guys. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed that conversation. Great to be part of the team,
yeah.
I think we're going to have to wrap that one up. Michael is looking over at us here to make sure we're getting ready to wrap up. Rowan, I really enjoyed that. Thanks to Ben. But this was a kind of an eye-opener. I definitely... Will we ask Brendan back?
Oh, we'll see. No, we can let him resume his seat.
Well, we might get you to take over for me if I'm away again.
Yeah. It's good to step in every now and again, a bit of banter. But this has been great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
I think next time, though, with the weather, we should probably do it in the beer garden. It's a bit warm.
We'll try and do some clinking noises.
Exactly.
Listen, thank you very much for you, Rowan.
Thank you indeed. Thank
you to everybody listening, and we will see you all and hear you all and talk to you all very soon. Take care.